welcome to all of you. My name is Jessica. I'm the founder and managing director of Eco Business, and I'm really thrilled to be here with all of you this afternoon here in KL. I actually had just come back from Jakarta, where we hosted the first Unlocking Capital for Sustainability just prior to the ASEAN meetings, and I was there for the ASEAN Business and Investment Forum. And of course, you know that ASEAN leaders are all in Jakarta right now talking about the future of the region, geopolitical tensions, as well as how we can all work together collectively for sustainable development. We're super excited to be having this conversation here in KL on Malaysia specifically, and Malaysia is a destination very close to my heart. My father was from Penang, and we have been really expanding our team here over the years, and very delighted to welcome Khairun, who is our newest addition as Country Director for Eco Business Malaysia. And we are really, really excited because last year we held our first event virtually as part of this Thought Leadership Forum. And at that time, we were still emerging out of the throes of the pandemic. And we were hosting this event online with more than 100 decision makers. And at that time, Malaysia had also just suffered major flooding across its entire country. And the conversation was very much about climate infrastructure and how it was severely underinvested, and how can we build climate resilience for a country that really has so many developmental needs. More than a year on, I'd be happy to say that we are back with in-person events, and nothing really quite replaces the in-person experience. But then, sad to say, the global macroeconomic outlook is still a very murky one. We've seen that economies are suffering inflationary pressures, rising interest rates, and there's much geopolitical tension, no thanks to the war in Ukraine as well. And this is a time of high uncertainty and volatility. And meanwhile, we all have seen the global headlines. In fact, Hong Kong and China being flooded right now. And in the past year, extreme heat in Europe, in India, all across Asia. Our UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has declared the era of global boiling as our era. We have the misfortune to live in this era, but it really actually just brings home the fact that we need urgent action today. And I've been covering the climate sector for 20 years now, and over the years, people always ask me, how do you not get depressed? Because you've been covering this for so long, and it always seems as if it's one step forward, two steps back. And my response is, yes, sometimes I do get out of bed, and it's kind of depressing reading the headlines, but we do have to press on. There is no other choice, because this really is our only home. It sounds cliche, but that is true. And really, for us to achieve the transition that we need to a situation where we're thriving in harmony with planet and people, this is going to require a large amount of investment. Developing Asia is estimated to require $37 trillion of investments over the next 3 decades to meet our Paris Agreement targets. And many countries are still grappling from the global pandemic with constrained budgets, high capital costs. It is very obvious that public sector funding is grossly insufficient for this investment and this energy transition. So the solution really is we need to crowd in private capital, we need to crowd in philanthropic capital, and we need to urgently invest this into the infrastructure that we need. Governments at the same time are also grappling with priorities of poverty alleviation, livelihoods, jobs, energy security, and you have seen from the ASEAN discussions and global discussions really that the developing countries are protecting their right to develop, their right to have power stations, their right to emit. But I think that there is a common path forward for all the countries so that we can meet our planetary and social goals, but at the same time as meeting our climate goals. And that answer really is the just transition, and that is the topic of our forum today. But how do we achieve it really, I think is the bigger question. I've attended the Climate Governance Summit this week, and Dr. Carla, who's one of our speakers as well, she got up on stage yesterday and talked about how boards are really just beginning to grapple with climate risk and the ISSB standards. And she said to me, wow, now we have the just transition. The boards are going to be, how many things do we need to grapple with? And that is a very, very, a notable point, and it's something that we all have to grapple with. But we thought it was really important to put this on the agenda and to have that conversation now. Because we know that it's not an easy one, and we need the policy frameworks, we need the corporate action to all come together so that we can start early and we can actually formulate strategies and execute it so that it's effective. So I would like to say that, we want to chart a way forward, which is a shared prosperity in which people and planet can thrive and not at the expense of each other. And there's one favorite thing I like to say, which Dr. Kala also mentioned yesterday, which is that we are not saving the planet. That is a misnomer. We are actually saving ourselves and humanity by getting the policy frameworks that we really need. So I want to thank really our partners and speakers who will be sharing their insights with us this afternoon, and to all of you for being here. I'd like to encourage all of you to think about what is that action that we can take, whether it's in our professional lives and our personal lives, which can really help to move the needle on this transition. All the observations and interactions and insights from this forum across the region will be distilled into an action report, which will then be shared with all our stakeholders and readers. Together, I believe that we can help to accelerate Malaysia's sustainable development journey. So I'm very much looking forward to moderating the fireside chat and interacting with all of you today. Thank you.
Jessica and distinguished participants of this gathering today. Like you, I'm also very delighted to see many new faces, in particular from the private sector. I've been involved with the environment by accident. Almost 35 years ago, when I was a young academic at UKM, I was co-opted into the Malaysian delegation negotiating the UN Biodiversity Treaty in Nairobi. I was very happy being an academic. In fact, I really enjoy teaching the students. But at the end of the first day of negotiation, I plucked enough courage to go up to my head of delegation, Ambassador Ting, who was known as Iron Lady in the UN then for being a great negotiator. I told her, Madam, I think I want to go home. And she looked at me. First she was amused, then she was quite upset. She said, why do you want to do that? I said, I cannot understand this forum here in the UN. You had 1 hour of plenary, you adjourned to the delegates' lounge, you sit there for 2 hours drinking coffee and enjoying scone. She said, Professor, give yourself a few more days. Ladies and gentlemen, that was 35 years ago. I never look back. You know why? Because it was in the delegates' lounge where horses were traded, treaties or agreements were made. And when they adjourned to the plenary, it was just to gavel the yes, and that's how it is. So, second lesson has been a very long journey and a very lonely one. You won't have this kind of interest in Malaysia or elsewhere towards the environment. In fact, environment was a side dish, People don't really care. But today it has become mainstream, in particular the ESG. Can I have the first slide? Yes, I've been asked to talk a bit about how we could integrate ESG into the corporate culture. So my leaning must be from my scientific background, so less on the corporate aspect. So if I stumble on that, please forgive me. Yeah? I know there's some great people from Bank Negara and the banks who know better than me. First thing that we need to know, that we need to integrate why we are trying to go into ESG, The real reason is really our unsustainable ways, really. I have a few slides, but you have complemented that with your montage just now, which shows that really the problem is climate change, biodiversity loss, and microplastic pollution, isn't it? That is the real reason why humanity or the global community got to rise up to act and be counted. Because in climate change itself is almost hopeless, you know. We have a lot of rhetorics. Now we're going to COP28 in Dubai. For many years, there's a lot of rhetoric, but less action, yeah. That is on climate change. We can discuss about this later on, but suffice to say, we are not internalizing the problem until now on climate change. As the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, we are really at war with nature, and we are going to lose. As Julia Roberts once mentioned in a beautiful 3-minute, I'm nature, you know. There's nothing you can do to me. I will survive, she said, but you are going to lose. Humanity is going to lose. And that is on climate change, global warming. The second one is on biodiversity loss. And there's such a thing called ecosystem services. I'm not sure whether you are familiar with that. But really, ecosystem services, biodiversity, provide us the water that you're drinking, air that you're breathing, food that you're eating, and it's the web of life. And in one assessment by the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, IPBES, in 2019, they say that almost 1 million species of this thing that we are dependent upon is under threat of extinction. Yeah. So that is also one the reason why late last year in Montreal, the world community agreed on the Kunming-Montreal Protocol, Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. That agreement is equivalent to what they did in Paris in 2015, the Paris Accords. Yeah? And now the third one is on micropollution. The world has just begun to negotiate on that. Those are all at the global level, which we must take a serious look, because no one is going to be a bystander. Yeah? So it's along that background that I'm going to proceed, and goes right to you here, in particular those from the corporate sector. So challenges for companies, it ranges from the very basic, the need to decarbonize, net zero by 2050, to becoming nature positive, nature friendly. Then how do you contribute to an inclusive and equitable society? How do you own up to the stakeholders? How do you keep the business successful in uncertain world? And this is the point, ladies and gentlemen. I would just right off the bat telling you, one of my worries is whether we are seriously internalizing the problem or whether we are here because of the bottom line, the money aspect, in a sense, it's more than that. It's really an ethical and a moral question. I hope eventually, if we are going to succeed in this, where everyone would play their role, it has to be the moral and ethical obligation. So, this is a quote that a friend gave me, I don't need to remind you, but this is quite disturbing, isn't it? But it's quite real. Can I have a glass of water? Yeah, ada ke? And these gatekeepers here, I think, are also well known to these participants today, I think. You know, there are a number of organization watchdog that would want you to adhere to some of these standards. There's quite many, but as you can also notice, there's no common agreement on this. Still work in progress. So why should ESG matter to business? I mentioned that in an earlier discussion, but really these are some of those which include mega trends and disruption, which I've just described. The biggest one is, of course, climate change, but also very practically the investors, who want more data on the company's ESG performance. Employees, of course, wanting to work for employers that incorporate ESG into their purpose. And as Malaysians, we have watched in despair some of the consequences when companies don't adhere to this, isn't it? Case in point, about 2 years ago, when a big glove company's product was stopped because of some of the things that they were alleged to be doing on their workers, yeah? And of course also where ships carrying Malaysian palm oil were stopped because of this. So it's very real, where the demands of the customers that you must meet. And of course, regulation, increasing regulation around ESG issues. This is also one thing that bothers me. It's always regulation that would keep us on our feet, isn't it? It's just like driving on the highway. We would drive quite fast, but when we know there are cops around the corner, we would slow down. So this is my worry, because you're doing it for something enforced onto you, not so much the ethical and moral conduct, And of course, the good work done by NGOs and communities, increasing the awareness around. So this is the business context. We have discussed this, climate change, biodiversity loss, and all sorts of things that's happening today, like those big floods, for instance, in Pakistan last year, where 1,700 lives were lost, hundreds of billions damages, and our very own 1 in 100-year flood in 2021, where 50 lives were lost, but about 6 billion ringgit damages were incurred. So no one is spared, really. So there are issues from the investor, and there are some here: governance, strategy, risk management, metrics, and targets. And let's skip that one. And increasingly, the regulators like Bursa Malaysia here are introducing many sets of steps that would encourage the private sector to toe the line, yeah, and also to increase their value, the value of their products. These are a few, I think, fresh from your climate change conference yesterday. We don't need to dwell on this. And emerging trends for senior managers and boards. This is one thing I think we should be very, very concerned that companies must approach ESG matters in the same way to approach any other financial risk. And it has to evolve from non-financial to the material financial risk. And knowing fully well the legislators, regulators, and investors are very keen to do their part. These are some of the drivers, you know. This would affect business people, which most of the time would be involved in this kind of practice, like short-term maximization of shareholder value at the expense of long-term value creation, companies lacking strategic perspective, and the need to shift towards sustainability. Very quickly, this is just a repetition of the earlier one, where there is a need for awareness on a number of these things, ranging from regulation, the risk of litigation, and also stakeholders' expectation. I would skip on this litigation just to say that there are many entry points on this particular aspect of governance. Fiduciary duties and stakeholders. This is an old slide, so I would also jump on this. Yeah, I'm given 20 minutes, right? I would rather just go on the need again for the corporate sector to internalize what is now known as the ESG. ESG, I think, of course, is about 20 years, 2004, introduced by the UN Global Compact. Yeah, but the idea goes back a long way, really. In fact, from the Rio Earth Summit in 1992, and earlier than that, the seminal work of Madame Brundtland on our common future, where they define what sustainable development is, meaning using only what you need and leaving more for future generation. That is also the core element. I hope the corporate sector, the private sector would take note, because Gandhi, who doesn't really know, well, I think he knows a lot about sustainability, when he said there's enough for everyone's need, but not enough for everyone's greed. It's just mind-boggling, you see, for someone like him to define that before this notion about sustainability, ESG, came into fashion over the last few years. So there's a lot of sparks, Gandhi, Brundtland, and others, but the political commitment is still lacking. And I can say that from experience of more than 30 years at the UN level. There's a lot of rhetoric. Even the issue of climate change, I still have time. Huh? You just tell me to stop. We can revisit. Even the issue of climate change, there's a lot of talk. And sometimes, in particular, people in the developing countries like ours, Malaysia, the Philippines, Indonesia, Singapore is a different case, of course. We are small contributors to the climate problem, isn't it? What, 0.16% of our emission, very small. So I also advise my colleagues, do not be too defensive of what we must do. Do not feel guilty, because much of that problem is created by the rich countries, the industrialized countries. But of course, today we are a global community. We would go along with that, and that is manifested in the so-called NCD of Malaysia. Yeah. What I'm trying to get here in terms of the funding, the finance for climate change, for instance, which runs into the billions, hundreds of billions, and what is available now is very much less. My time is out. 5 more minutes.
2 minutes.
Okay, then there is this principle, I'm not sure whether they've heard, common but differentiated responsibility, CBDR. Common to everyone but differentiated. So the heavier responsibility must be from the rich countries. But having said that, I must also say that we in the global south are no less responsible for climate change or biodiversity loss. And this is where political leadership, political commitment, or in Malay they call it iltizam, yeah, which is lacking, so there's more rhetoric than action. Just one case in that particular aspect, investment of developing countries in R&D. Countries like Japan, countries like South Korea, countries like Germany, they spend more than 2.5% of their GDP on R&D. And you look at developing countries, we spend less than 1%. Malaysia used to spend 1.5%. Somehow we were sliding down. Because here again, it links to political commitment. And the saying by Winston Churchill in an address in Harvard University, when someone said he was half drunk, but he was still brilliant, when he said, the empires of the future depend on the empires of the mind. So reflect on that. So with that, let me conclude, and I'll be very happy to interact with you in more detail. Thank you.